gavel comes down in Harlan County Probate Court at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning. Judge Meredith Sewell reads the final order in a flat, careful voice. The Callaway Creek property, all 212 acres, the cattle operation, the equipment, the mineral rights, awarded to Terrence and Blythe Ashford. Silas Van stands at the respondent's table without moving. His attorney puts a hand on his arm. Silas does not look at the hand. He looks at the window on the far wall, the one that faces the parking lot, the one where, if a person stood at the right angle, they could see the county road that ran north toward the creek land his wife had loved more than anywhere on earth. He inclines his head once. He picks up his jacket from the back of the chair. He walks out. Terrence Ashford watches him go with the expression of a man who has already decided what to order for lunch. In the hallway, marble floors, and the smell of old radiator heat, Silas passes the coat rack, passes the water fountain, passes the bulletin board with its laminated notices about jury duty and parking permits. He pushes through the heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. The cold hits him flat across the face. November in eastern Tennessee comes without apology. He walks down the courthouse steps and crosses the small square. At the far edge of the parking lot, past the statue of some general nobody in this county could name anymore, a flatbed truck idles. On the flatbed sits a piece of equipment wrapped in a moving blanket and 3 cargo straps. Beside the truck stands a woman in a barn coat and a man Silas had called his foreman for 19 years. The man's name is Webb. He does not say anything when Silas reaches him. He pulls a thermos from the truck cab and hands it over. Behind them, the courthouse doors open. Terrence Ashford steps out with his wife and his son-in-law and his attorney, all 4 of them wearing the expressions of people who have just won something at low cost. Blythe sees the truck first. She sees the moving blanket. She sees the shape underneath it and stops walking. Terrence stops beside her. The shape under the blanket is the Van family's original land survey equipment, a set of brass instruments from 1887 that Silas's great-great-grandfather had used to mark the boundaries of Callaway Creek when the Federal Land Office had still been issuing homestead patents. The Ashfords had claimed them as part of the estate. Their attorney had listed them in the asset schedule. They were worth, according to the estate appraiser, $400. Silas had not contested the appraisal. His attorney had not filed a counterclaim. He had simply asked Webb, the week before, to load the instruments onto the flatbed along with the one other item in the moving blanket, a framed survey map from the same year, hand-drawn in ink, that the County Historical Commission had once offered to purchase, and that Silas's wife, Clara, had turned down because she had said it belonged on the wall where it had always been. On the back of the survey map, in the lower left corner, in handwriting so small it required a magnifying glass, was a notation that no estate appraiser had been asked to evaluate. Silas had known it was there since he was 11 years old. Clara had known it was there since the day she inherited the land from her father. Neither of them had ever told anyone, because they had never needed to. The notation was a mineral rights reservation from the original 1887 homestead filing, separate from the surface deed, registered with the Federal Land Office under a different instrument number. It had never been formally extinguished. Under the doctrine of after-acquired title, it had passed through 4 generations of continuous family descent and, as of the current federal registry, belonged not to the surface owner of Callaway Creek, but to the holder of the original mineral patent. The holder of the original mineral patent was a trust Clara had established for their daughter before she died. Silas knew this because he had spent the 2 years following Clara's death quietly working with a title attorney in Nashville on exactly this question. And the answer had come back in writing 6 weeks before the probate hearing. He had not filed the documentation with the court because the court had not asked him about it. The Ashfords had not asked him about it. Their attorney had not thought to look. The moving blanket was not about the instruments or the map. The moving blanket was about the fact that Silas was giving the Ashfords everything they had asked for and nothing they had not. Terrence finally found his voice. It came out smaller than he intended. "What is that?" Silas handed the thermos back to Webb. He looked at Terrence across the parking lot. "Moving blanket," he said. He got in the truck. 12 hours earlier, in the kitchen of a rented house on the edge of Harlan proper, Silas had stood at the counter making 2 plates of scrambled eggs. His daughter, Alma, sat at the kitchen table in the clothes she had slept in, her hair pulled back in a rubber band she had found in a junk drawer. She was 7 years old, And she had her mother's eyes and her mother's habit of reading the back of cereal boxes with total concentration, even when the cereal box had not changed in 3 months. "Is today the day, the day?" she asked without looking up. "Today's the day." She turned the box over to the front panel and set it down. "Is Grandpa Terrence going to be there?" "He is." She thought about this. She picked up her fork. "He doesn't like us very much." Silas set her plate down in front of her. He sat across from her. He did not tell her that was not true because she was 7 and she had been paying attention. "He loves the land," he said. "He thinks loving the land means it should belong to him." Alma considered this with the seriousness of a person who has recently lost one parent and is taking nothing for granted. "But the land was Mama's." "Yes, and she gave it to us." "She gave the trust to you," Silas said. "That's a different thing, and it's a thing that doesn't go away." Alma looked at her eggs. "Okay," she said. The way she said it, flat and considered and without drama, was exactly the way Clara had said it when she had made up her mind. Silas drove her to school. He kissed her on top of the head at the drop-off line. He waited until she had gone through the doors. In the car, he called Webb. "Meet me at the storage unit at 9. Bring the flatbed." He drove the rental truck to the courthouse alone. He parked 2 blocks away. He walked. The gallery held Terrence and Blythe, their son-in-law, their attorney, and 4 people Silas did not recognize who were probably there because they had nothing else to do on a November morning. Silas sat at the respondent's table with his own attorney, a woman named Frances Veld who had driven up from Nashville specifically for this, and whose briefcase sat closed on the table in front of her. Her instructions were the same as they had been for 6 weeks. Do not contest the property claim. Contest only the trust instrument's exemption from the estate. Silas did not look at Terrence during the proceedings. He looked at Judge Meredith Sewell, who was 61, who wore reading glasses on a chain, and who had the manner of a person who had heard every version of every family argument and was still, somehow, genuinely interested in getting it right. She was not the judge he would have expected. He had appeared before a different judge twice in the preceding months, a procedural matter and a continuance, and this was his first time before Sewell. He had read what he could find about her rulings. She was thorough. She was patient. She had a reputation for asking the question no one expected her to ask. She asked it halfway through the morning. Terrence's attorney had finished his argument about the scope of the estate. Silas's attorney had confirmed without emotion that the respondent did not contest the transfer of the surface property. Sewell looked over the top of her reading glasses. "Mr. Van, you're not contesting 212 acres of land, a cattle operation, and equipment valued at roughly $400,000. "No, Your Honor." A pause. She made a note. "Is there anything in this estate that you are contesting?" Frances Veld cleared her throat once. "The respondent is contesting the characterization of the Mineral Rights Trust as a marital asset subject to distribution." Sewell's pen stopped. She looked at Veld. She looked at Silas. She asked for the instrument number. Veld read it into the record. Terrence's attorney objected. He argued the trust had not been disclosed in the original estate inventory. Veld said it had not been included in the estate inventory because it was not an estate asset. It was a separate legal instrument established prior to the marriage, transferred to a minor beneficiary by the grantor before death, and registered with the Federal Land Office under a homestead patent that predated the marital property by 136 years. Sewell set her pen down. She looked at the window for 3 seconds. Then she asked both attorneys to submit supplemental briefing within 14 days. The ruling on the surface property stood. Terrence would get the land. Blythe would get the cattle operation. Silas walked out. He got in the truck with Webb, and they drove north, out of Harlan proper, up the county road past the feed store and the grain elevator, to the storage unit where the flatbed waited. They loaded the instruments and the map in 20 minutes. They drove back past the courthouse without stopping. 3 weeks later, the supplemental briefing came in. Sewell read it over a weekend. On Monday morning, she issued a scheduling order for a hearing on the mineral rights question. She had, in the intervening days, pulled the original 1887 homestead patent from the Federal Land Records database. She had pulled the chain of title on the Callaway Creek property back to its origin. She had found the notation. She had not been able to stop thinking about it. Not about the legal question, which was complex but solvable. about the man who had known it was there for the entire length of the proceeding and had said nothing until his attorney was directly asked. She had been on the bench for 14 years. She had seen people hide assets. She had seen people lie about them, minimize them, transfer them fraudulently to relatives, move them offshore, bury them in shell companies. She had never seen a person simply wait to be asked. She did not know what to do with that information. She filed it. She went back to work. The mineral rights hearing was set for a Thursday in December. By the time it arrived, Silas had moved Alma into a house he was renting on a different road, one with a yard and a school bus stop at the end of the driveway. Alma had started second grade. She had made one friend, a girl named Opal who lived 2 houses down and who, according to Alma, had strong opinions about which animals would make the best judges if animals could be judges. Alma's position was owls. Opal's position was elephants. The debate was ongoing. Silas drove Alma to school on hearing days. He drove the same truck he had driven since the year Alma was born. He wore the same canvas work jacket he had worn the morning of the probate ruling. He did not own a suit. He had borrowed a sport coat from Webb and left it in the truck, and he put it on in the courthouse parking lot and took it off again when he got back in the truck. And this was the full extent of his formal dress preparation. Sol noticed the sport coat the first time she saw him in the hearing. She noticed that it did not fit quite right across the shoulders. She noticed that he wore it as if he was not entirely sure why it was required. She wrote nothing about this in her notes. The hearing took most of the morning. Francis Veld laid out the chain of title with the care of a person who had been building to this specific argument for 2 years. The 1887 patent, the continuous descent, the trust instrument Clara had established, the registration, the exemption under federal homestead law for marital property division. Terrence's attorney argued strenuously. He argued that the trust had been created in contemplation of divorce, which was not true. He argued that the mineral rights had merged with the surface title by operation of law, which Francis Veld addressed with 5 federal cases dating back to 1923. He argued that a trust established by a dying woman for her minor daughter was a fraudulent transfer. And here Sol set her pen down and looked at him over her reading glasses and said in a voice that did not rise, that he should take care with the language he chose in her courtroom. Terrence sat behind his attorney with the expression of a man watching money leave through a window he had not previously known existed. At the lunch break, Silas sat alone in the courthouse cafeteria. He ate a sandwich that tasted like the plastic it had been wrapped in. He thought about Alma. He opened his phone. He texted Webb. "How is she doing?" Webb texted back a photo. Alma in the school cafeteria, lunch tray in front of her, talking to Opal with both hands, the way she talked when she was completely absorbed in making a point. Silas looked at the photo for a while. He ate the rest of the sandwich. Sol ate lunch at her desk. She read through a motion in a different case. She found herself rereading the same paragraph 3 times without registering it. She put the motion down. She ate her lunch. She did not think about the hearing. She went back to work. The afternoon session concluded at 4. Sol took the matter under advisement. She gave no indication of a timeline. She thanked both attorneys. She left the bench. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Silas stopped at the water fountain. When he straightened up, Sol was passing at the far end of the corridor, briefcase over her shoulder, reading glasses on her chain. She glanced in his direction once. He nodded. She kept walking. She did not understand why she slowed her pace for 3 steps after she passed him. She understood the case. The case was clear. The mineral rights belonged to Alma's trust. Terrence Ashford had made a significant error in assuming that everything on or under Callaway Creek belonged to whoever held the surface deed. His attorney had made a larger error in not researching the question before filing. These were errors she could rule on without difficulty. What she could not easily account for was the quality of Silas's silence throughout all of it. She had watched him for 2 full hearings now, and he had never once been the loudest thing in the room. He had never raised his voice, expressed frustration, addressed Terrence directly, or said a single word to the press that had begun appearing outside the courthouse after the Harlan County Courier ran a front-page story about the mineral rights dispute. The Courier had described him as a local cattle farmer. He had not corrected this. She drove home through the early December dark. She thought about the case. She went over the statute one more time in her head. and arrived at the same place she always did. She was going to rule in favor of the trust. She issued the order on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the hearing. The mineral rights under Callaway Creek, which sat atop a natural gas formation that a Houston-based energy company had been quietly trying to lease for 18 months, were the property of the trust established by Clara Vaughn for the benefit of Alma Vaughn. The Ashfords' claim was denied. Their attorney's motion to reconsider was denied. A second motion, filed the following week on different grounds, was denied in 40 minutes. Silas heard the news from Francis Beld on the phone while he was changing a tire on the rental truck in the driveway. He sat on the running board for a while after she hung up. The cold came up from the asphalt through his jeans. He sat there anyway. The bare oak tree at the end of the yard moved in the wind. He had not planted it. He had not planted anything here yet. He thought about what Clara had said once, about the creek land, about how the best thing you could do with ground that had always been in a family was make sure someone was still paying attention to it 100 years from now. Alma was still at school. He drove to pick her up early. She came out of the building already talking about the owl versus elephant argument, which had apparently expanded to include eagles and, controversially, dolphins. She did not stop talking until they were halfway home, and then she looked out the window at the bare fields going past and said, without preamble, "Did we win?" "The trust is safe," he said. She thought about this. So Mama's thing worked. It did. She went back to the window. After a moment she said, "She was smart. She was the smartest person I have known." Alma accepted this as a settled fact. She went back to the dolphin argument. The town had been watching the proceedings the way small towns watch anything that involves land and family and a courthouse. People who had not spoken to Silas in the years since Clara's illness now stopped him at the hardware store, at the gas station, at the school pickup line, with a version of the same expression, part admiration, part the specific discomfort of people who had made assumptions they were now reconsidering. He was the same as he had been. He wore the same jacket. He drove the same truck. He stopped at the same diner for coffee on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and sat at the same stool at the counter, and talked to the same waitress, a woman named Pearl who had worked there since before he was born, and who had a policy of not discussing anything that had been in the newspaper. He appreciated this about Pearl. 3 weeks after the ruling, Silas went back to the county courthouse for an unrelated matter, a permit for the new fencing he planned to put in around the rented property to give Alma somewhere to keep a small animal, which she had been requesting with increasing specificity. The permit office was on the second floor. He took the stairs. Coming down, he nearly walked into Sewell at the landing. She had her briefcase and a stack of file folders and was clearly between something and something else. He stepped aside. She stepped aside. They were briefly in each other's way. "Judge Sewell, Mr. Van." She shifted the folders. "Permit office, fencing. My daughter wants a goat." Sewell looked at him. Something moved in her expression that was not quite a smile. "How old is she?" "7. They're serious at 7. She's already named it." "What did she name it?" "Senator," he said. "She says it fits the temperament." This time, Sewell did laugh. It was brief and genuine, and it surprised her slightly. She rearranged the folders. "Good luck with the permit," she said. She continued down the stairs. At the bottom, she paused for half a second without turning around, in the way a person does when they have remembered something and decided not to say it. Then, she went through the door. Silas stood on the landing with his permit application. He looked at the door. He went upstairs. He thought about the landing for longer than made sense. The weeks moved. December gave way to a January that was colder than anyone in Harlan County wanted to acknowledge. Silas worked on the fencing himself, most mornings before Alma got up, because the physical work suited him and because there was something about early winter mornings in the yard, the ground hard under his boots, the sky going from black to gray to pale at the edges, that had always helped him think without thinking about anything in particular. The goat arrived in February, a 7-month-old alpine doe with an unplaceable expression and strong opinions about fence corners. Alma named it Senator and proceeded to explain to it, at length, the difference between owls and dolphins as instruments of judgment. Senator was not visibly moved. Sol drove past the rented house on a Tuesday morning. Her usual route to the courthouse had been disrupted by a water main repair, and saw, through the gap in the bare hedgerow at the road's edge, a man in a canvas jacket crouching at a fence post while a small girl in a pink coat and rain boots stood beside him explaining something to a goat. She drove past. She did not slow down. She went to work. She thought about it twice during the day and told herself, both times, that she was thinking about the fencing technique, which was a lie she recognized as a lie. In March, Alma's school held a science fair in the gymnasium on a Saturday morning. It was the kind of event that smelled like poster board and gym shoes, and the specific anxiety of children who have built volcanoes. Silas arrived early with Alma, who had constructed a demonstration about soil composition at different depths on the Callaway Creek land, using soil samples she had collected with Webb on one of their visits. The Ashfords still owned the surface. Webb had asked. Terrence had refused access. Alma had used soil samples from Webb's property instead and labeled them clearly. I changed the data source, she told Silas. But the science is the same. He thought about this on the drive over. He told her she was right. Sewell arrived at the gymnasium 20 minutes after the fair opened. Her nephew, 8 years old, had built something involving magnetism and ball bearings that he described as self-explanatory. And that was not, in any way, self-explanatory. She walked the rows with him. She read the poster boards. She found herself stopped in front of a display titled, "What Lives Underground," with hand-labeled jars of soil at different depths and a diagram of a cross-section drawn in colored pencil. She looked at the name card, Alma Van, grade 2. She looked up. Silas was 10 feet away, talking to a man she didn't recognize. He had not seen her yet. Alma was standing beside her display, with the focused expression of someone prepared to explain soil composition to anyone who approached. Sol approached. "Can you tell me about your project?" Alma told her, at considerable length. She explained the difference between topsoil and subsoil. She explained what clay did to drainage. She explained, with particular emphasis, that what was under the ground was often more important than what was visible on the surface, and that a lot of people made the mistake of thinking the ground was just one thing. "That's very perceptive," Sol said. Alma looked at her with the directness of a child who takes a compliment seriously. "My dad says the best things are usually the ones that take a long time to see." Sol was still looking at the soil diagrams when Silas appeared beside his daughter. He had the expression of a man who had noticed her arrival a moment too late to decide what to do about it, and had decided to do nothing. "Judge Sewell. Mr. Van. Your daughter's project is the most original thing in the room." Alma beamed. Senator the Goat, she informed Sewell, had also helped by standing near the fence posts where the soil samples had been taken and contributing a scientific atmosphere. "Senator," Sewell said. "My goat," Alma said. "He has a gift for judgment." She paused. "She?" "Senator is a she." Sewell looked at Silas. "She's very consistent on the pronoun," he said. There was a moment. It was a small moment, both of them in the crowded gymnasium with children moving around them and poster boards and the smell of gym shoes. But it was a real one. Sol felt it settle in her chest in the way she had learned, over the last several months, to recognize and choose not to name. She named it anyway, privately, driving home. She sat in the driveway for a few minutes before going inside. She had been a judge for 14 years. She had spent those years in the company of conflict, of people at their worst and their most frightened and their most dishonest. She had learned to be precise about everything, about language and procedure and the distance required to rule fairly. She had not been, in a long time, imprecise about anything. She was being imprecise about this. She went inside. 2 weeks later, Alma walked up to Sewell in the school parking lot. Sewell was dropping off her nephew, and announced, without preamble, that her father was coming to the spring community breakfast at the VFW hall next Saturday, and that Sewell should also come because the pancakes were serious. Sewell looked at Silas, who was standing 10 feet back with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the expression of a man who had been informed of this plan approximately 4 seconds before she was. "I'll try to make it," Sol said. She made it. The VFW hall smelled like coffee and maple syrup and the heating system working too hard. Sol arrived late and found a seat near the window. Silas and Alma were already there, at a long table with Webb and a few people she didn't know. Alma spotted her immediately and waved with both arms. They ended up at the same table. Alma ate 2 plates of pancakes and explained, to anyone willing to listen, that Senator had recently discovered an interest in cardboard boxes and that this was a new development they were all monitoring closely. At one point, Silas refilled Sol's coffee from the carafe on the table without asking, because it was there and her cup was empty. The same way you would do for anyone at a table you were sharing. He did not look at her when he did it. She did not look at him. She thanked him and went back to listening to Alma describe the cardboard box situation. She thought about that moment, the carafe, the ordinary, reflexive ease of it, for the rest of the day. Spring arrived slowly, the way it always does in eastern Tennessee, 1 degree at a time. The creek ran high with snowmelt. Silas expanded the fencing. He broke ground on a small building at the back of the property, a workshop. Alma started visiting the Callaway Creek land with Webb on weekends, not because they had legal access to the surface, the Ashfords still controlled that, but because the gas company's leasing process had begun in earnest, and the trust's attorney required regular site visits to document the mineral rights boundary, and a judge had issued an access order. The energy company's landman came to see Silas in April. His name was not important. He wore a Patagonia vest and a shirt that was too crisp for a Tuesday morning in Harlan County. He sat across from Silas at the kitchen table and made his offer for a long-term mineral lease. Silas listened to the whole thing. He asked 3 questions. He said he would need 2 weeks. The landman said the window was closing. Silas said he understood and showed him to the door. He called Frances Veld. He called the trust's financial advisor, a woman in Knoxville who had managed the trust since Clara established it. He called Webb. He sat with the numbers for several days. He thought about what Clara would have done, which was usually what he did when he was uncertain, not because it told him the answer, but because it helped him hear his own thinking more clearly. What she would have done was exactly what he did: accept the lease, negotiate the royalty rate upward by 11%, require an environmental compliance rider, and donate the first year's proceeds to the land preservation fund the county had been trying to capitalize for a decade. He told Alma over dinner. She put down her fork. She said, "So the land stays our land? The mineral rights stay in the trust, which is yours, but Grandpa Terrence has the surface. He does." Alma thought about this. "So we own what's underneath, and he owns what's on top." "That's right." She picked up her fork. "That seems fair," she said, in the tone of a person who does not think it is entirely fair but who has decided to accept it because the alternative is worse. "It does," Silas said. He did not tell her that Terrence Ashford had that week contacted Frances Veld about the possibility of a negotiated settlement on the surface land. He did not tell her because it was not yet anything, and because she was 7, and because some things were worth letting be ordinary until they became decided. A few miles away, Sol was at her kitchen table with a glass of water and a legal brief she was supposed to have read 2 hours ago. She was not reading it. She was looking at the window. Outside, the spring dark had settled over the town and the streetlight on the corner made a small orange circle on the wet pavement. She thought about the pancake breakfast, about the carafe, about the soil diagrams, about Alma saying the best things are usually the ones that take a long time to see. She thought about the way Silas had nodded to her at the bottom of the courthouse stairs, and she had sped up her pace and then slowed down 3 steps later without meaning to. She picked up her phone. She set it down. She picked it up again and typed a message to the Harlan County Bar Association, declining to serve another term on the Judicial Nominating Committee. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a while. May. The VFW held a Memorial Day ceremony in the square, and Silas took Alma because she had asked to go and because he thought it was worth going to, and they stood near the back with Webb and his wife and listened to the names. Alma held Silas's hand the way she only did when she understood that something was important, with both of hers wrapped around his one. Afterward, in the square, in the slow dispersal of a small-town gathering, Sol was there with her nephew and her sister, who was visiting from Chattanooga. Alma found her immediately and began an update on Senator's cardboard box situation, which had evolved. Sol's sister watched Silas from across the group of people. Then she looked at Sol. She said nothing. She was the kind of sister who knew when to say nothing. Later, walking to the car, she said, "That man." Sol said, "It's not what you think." Her sister said, "Tell me what it is." Sol did not answer. She opened the car. She drove her sister back to the house. She did not answer. But not because she didn't know. She knew. She was simply still deciding what to do with knowing it. The deciding did not take much longer. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, a handwritten note arrived at the courthouse addressed to her by name. Not to Judge Sewell, to Meredith Soule, on an envelope that had been left with the building manager who had left it on her desk. The note said that Alma had decided Senator needed to meet someone who understood the importance of what lived underground, and that there would be coffee at the house on Calloway Road on Sunday morning at 8, if that was convenient, and that the coffee would be good because Webb's wife had sent over the good beans and that there was no pressure. There was no signature. There did not need to be. She came. The coffee was good. Senator was presented, formally, in the side yard and was found to have indeed developed opinions about cardboard, fence posts, and the optimal location of the water bucket. Alma explained each opinion in sequence. Soule listened with full attention. Silas refilled her coffee from the pot without being asked, the same way he had at the VFW. The same way a person does when it has become ordinary. Alma went inside to get a drawing she had done of Senator wearing what she described as a judge's robe, because she had decided Senator's final career choice was the judiciary. They were alone for the first time. The yard was quiet except for the wind and the new leaves and Senator's feelings about a fence post. "Clara would have liked you," Silas said. It was not a performance. It was simply a thing he had come to know. Soule looked at the yard, at the bare ground where the new grass was coming in, at the workshop in the back that wasn't finished, at the fence he had built himself, post by post, in the cold mornings before his daughter woke up. "I think I would have liked her," she said. Alma came back with a drawing. Senator in judicial robes, gavel and hoof, expression severe. She presented it to Sewell with a small bow. "You should put it in your office," Alma said. "I will," Sewell said, and she meant it. The morning was ordinary and unhurried, and there was no moment that was more decisive than any other. They walked the property, the three of them, along the fence line, with Senator following at an interested distance. Silas pointed out where he planned to build the addition to the workshop. Alma explained where Senator preferred to stand in different weather conditions. Soule asked questions about the fencing and met them. They came back to the yard. The coffee had gone cold. Silas brought out 2 more cups from the house without being asked. He handed one to Sewell. She took it. Their hands were close on the ceramic. She looked at him, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything that needed to be said. Alma was telling Senator about the drawing. Senator was withholding judgment. Somewhere down the road, Webb was loading the flatbed with materials for the workshop foundation. The creekland was 2 miles north, past the grain elevator, past the feed store, past the county road that ran through the property Clara had loved more than anywhere. The gas company's equipment was on site now, carefully sited, within the access corridor the court had approved. Under 212 acres of ground that Terrence Ashford walked every day, the formation ran deep and straight and had been there since before any of them or their parents or their grandparents or their grandparents or their grandparents had been alive. It had not needed anyone to know it was there. It had waited. The coffee steamed in the May morning. Alma turned from Senator and looked at the two of them standing there. And she smiled the way children smile when the world has confirmed something they already knew. The wind came down from the ridge. The new grass moved. None of them was in any hurry to be somewhere else.